Hello and welcome. I'm Lee Purvis, hosting Journalism and Media Week live from Leeds Trinity University. I'd love to remind you all that we are, of course, live across Facebook and YouTube, so do please keep your comments coming in and, of course, those questions rolling as well. Now, it's with great delight that I get to introduce our next guest today. It is radio royalty, and of course, by this, I'm talking about the award-winning BBC Radio 4 Women's Hour presenter, Jane Garvey. Thank you, Jane, so much for being here today. You are so busy at the moment.
Well, thank you very much, Lee. I'm actually not that busy, to be honest. I've been down the shops and I've come back home. So I've got a day off today, relatively speaking. So it's quite nice. Good to do this.
It sounds very civilised. So obviously you've had quite a lengthy career in the world of broadcast.
That's a light way of putting it. Yes, thank you.
Please, can you take us back to the beginning? Because obviously you read English at Birmingham University.
Yeah.
And so how did you therefore transition from that into broadcast?
Okay, well, as a kid, I was just an absolute radio fanatic. I grew up in Liverpool. I was a big Liverpool fan, still am. And one way of keeping in touch with Liverpool, who were very sort of successful both domestically and in Europe during the 70s and 80s, was by listening to Radio Merseyside. And I think that was when I really got that kind of live radio bug. Absolutely loved it. And it was always at the back of my mind that maybe I could work for the BBC. When I was at school, I remember telling my careers teacher that I would like to work for the BBC. And she said, well, I don't think you will, because, I mean, you're not going to go to Oxford or Cambridge, so you can probably write that off. But why don't you think about applying to a local newspaper? And in a way, although she was discouraging and it wasn't very helpful, she was also sort of right, because at the time, I think the BBC did still back then favour Oxford and Cambridge people. And there are still a lot of them at the BBC. But I'm living proof that you don't have to have gone to Oxford or Cambridge, so you can forget that now. And at university, to my shame, I did no student journalism whatsoever. Left university with a lower second-class degree in English. Hadn't really tried very hard in that either. I was a bit of a waste of space, really, when I think about it. I had the idea that the BBC would come to find me, and of course they didn't. So in the end, after a failed career in advertising, I wrote to about 40, and you did have to write in those days, to about 40 local radio stations begging for work experience, and one of them replied, and that was that, really.
And can you remember that first day and sort of nerves or feelings that you may have felt? Because I don't think you ever tend to forget that feeling of being the new person, certainly the new girl.
Oh God, yeah. Well, this is 1987 was when I first walked into a local radio station, which in this case was Radio Wyvern in Worcester, a commercial station. The BBC wouldn't look at anybody with no experience. And to be fair to commercial radio, it was brilliant back then at giving people a chance. So I walked into the station in Worcester, and what I'll always remember, God's honest truth, the receptionist was asleep, and Radio Wyvern at that very moment was playing the Eagles. I'll always remember that. I could hear the Eagles coming through the sound system at the station. But I just fell in love. I fell in love with that radio station, actually, and I really fell in love with Herefordshire and Worcestershire. Beautiful part of the world, knew nothing about it, a lot of agriculture, obviously, just entered an extremely brilliant and learning curve part of my life. I learned so much in the 18 months I was at Radio Wyvern. Initially, I just gave out car stickers in a car park. And then one day, someone was off sick, and they got me reading something on air. I think it was the sports news. I was absolutely crap. But then somebody else was off sick and I got another chance. And I'm afraid it is as simple as that. My sole piece of advice, really, which probably should come at the end rather than now, is just no one will come looking for you. You've got to put yourself out there. Back in the 80s, the only way to do it was by going to the library and physically writing a letter. These days, you've got many more options, but no one is looking for you. You've got to put yourself right in front of them and say, employ me. It really is that simple.
Now, you were the first voice of Radio 5 Live when it launched. That's incredible. How did that feel at the time?
I think if it happened to me now, I'd be a nervous wreck, but I was only 29, and I'd only been in radio 6 years. So that was, it was 6 years after I wrote those letters asking for work experience. It's a very Anaraki experience, but I got the chance to say the first words on a national radio network. I'm the only woman to have done that, and that's the one thing they can't take away from me. So me and Tony Blackburn, we're like walking radio history. He said the first words on Radio 1 and I said them on 5 Live. So I'm very proud of that, actually. No, I mean, it was terrible. It was really nerve-wracking.
Do you still get nervous now? Do you still get the same feeling, adrenaline, or?
No, I do. Actually, funnily enough, I mean, I'm 56, and funnily enough, I think a lot of people in their 50s would say you actually get nervous again. You start to realise how much is at stake every time you sit in front of a live microphone talking to an entire nation. And of course, the entire nation's not listening. I mean, I'm not that mad. But, even so, it's very public. And even this week, I've said something that's upset people. And I've been doing this for 30 years. And I still get it wrong. And I just think it's worth bearing in mind, but I've asked to do this job and I've kept on doing it. So you can't complain. You've just got to always have that in the back of your mind.
And this actually takes me on to a question that I mentioned before to you about your time at 5 Live specifically, where there was a period of time where you got some horrendous social media messages really relating to your opinions and on-air views, I suppose, and discussions about feminism. How do you deal with that, and how did you deal with that at the time?
Well, actually, it wasn't so much. I mean, I think, as I say, you put yourself out there. You elect to do this as a job. You're both very thin-skinned because you're the sort of person psychologically who seeks approval. So you've got to get that one out there. On the whole, only slightly odd people want to become broadcasters. You've just got to accept that. I think Terry Wogan said broadcasters, radio presenters are introverted egomaniacs. And I do think that is completely right. So you put yourself out there and then you get all emotional when someone has a pop at you. Well, you know what, love? You could have done something else for a living. By the way, I still haven't got this right. I still get quite upset when people have a go at me, as they frequently do, sometimes justifiably. But I have chosen to do this for a living. On 5 Live, it was more because I was usually working with a man. So I worked for years with Peter Allen, who is he's a lovely man. He's a friend of mine. He's 20 years, I think, older than me, maybe a bit less. So we were the classic radio combination of older man, slightly younger woman, and the kind of the resulting quite old school banter that went on between us, which was good fun, by the way, and which I totally played my part in that. But what the listeners didn't like was when I did interviews where I was as arsey as he could be, if you see what I mean. So he was allowed to take on politicians. They didn't like it as much when it was me. And by the way, I do think that has slightly changed. So Emma Barnett, who's going to be taking over on Woman's Hour in the new year and is on 5 Live as we speak, is a much more gladiatorial and competitive interviewer than I would have been allowed to be, I think, in those days. She's also better than me, I should say. But, it's just, and people on the whole seem to be more accepting of that style in women than they used to be. But, a lot of listeners don't like women they perceive as, quotes, aggressive. And they will take it from a man. Now, I mean, I don't know why that is. We probably have to ask ourselves why that's still the case.
I was going to ask you about the on-air phenomenal relationship that you had with Peter Allen, actually. I think it was the Times that described you once as having a radio marriage made in heaven. And obviously you went on to win just the 4 Sony Gold Awards. What was the most prolific memory that you have of that radio partnership working together at the time? What's the most favourite memory that you have?
Oh, God, well, we went camping once when the BBC decided to splash some money on us doing an old school British holiday experience. So we went camping in Cromer and then did the programme from the campsite the next morning. I mean, it was just nonsensical stuff like that, really. Peter was he did a lot of war reporting. So he went to Iraq, for example. The reason I didn't go, frankly, I didn't want to, and I was pregnant at the time, so that it wouldn't have been a great idea. But also, I didn't want to, actually, which is perhaps something we could talk about. And Peter was a very, very good broadcaster in the most difficult situations, so things like that. And I felt I'm close to him. I was worried about him, And I think those sorts of conversations are, on-air conversations are, I do remember them. They're very significant and sometimes quite moving, actually. Also, he owned the fact, he was a very authentic broadcaster. He was no nicer on air than he is in real life. He didn't put on any kind of superficial bloody jollity, faux jollity, which I think and also faux niceness that a lot of broadcasters do. They have that kind of saccharine sort of on-air thing, and they're horrible, some of them, in real life. And you couldn't say that about Peter. He was absolutely himself, which is one of the many things I like about him. We actually just got on with each other. And they always say that radio double acts are better when they're either having an affair or, this is, couples who might want to have affairs, they're either having an affair or they hate each other. And Peter and I were neither of those two things. We actually were just friends, and it worked. And
it certainly did work.
We liked each other. That's actually the key thing. And we also bickered terribly. I mean, we did bicker a lot because he was an egomaniac, don't get me wrong, and he didn't want me taking up too much airtime. And I didn't want him doing it either. So that worked from that point of view.
So you mentioned just there previously, obviously you were pregnant at the time and you didn't want to go away and do this reporting job. Do you think that was a confidence thing? Because there's a lot of skepticism around women perhaps holding themselves back, certainly in media, and not propelling themselves forward when we perhaps should do.
In terms of me, I mean, I was literally pregnant, so I just wasn't going to go to Iraq. There was absolutely nothing that I felt that could justify it. And I would, I don't rate myself that much that I think I'm indispensable. I mean, I know I'm not. So I would never, ever, ever have done that when I was pregnant, or probably not even when I had a small child either, to be honest. I think it's a question of what your not what your values are, but what your priorities are. And in the end, you've got to be true to yourself. And I love radio and I love broadcasting. But obviously family and friends and everything else far, far more important. In terms of confidence, women do hold themselves back. But we are sort of from quite an early age encouraged to question ourselves. And I'm still doing it. I do find it hard to big myself up. And I find it excruciating. I'm not one of these, when I see people retweeting praise about themselves, as Andrew Neil I've seen has been doing that this morning. I mean, Andrew Neil's great, but I'm not quite sure why he feels the need to retweet the view of Darren in Grimsby telling him how good he was overnight. You just think, come on, love, you are really good, but let it lie. I don't know. I'm uneasy about all that. I know that's not quite what you asked me, but I wish women could be more confident. And I think, in fairness, it's slightly up to other women to allow them to be, and not to give them a hard time when they are. I think sometimes women are very hard on other women, and that's not great either. So we should maybe all have a word with ourselves about that, actually.
Oh, Jane, I'm not comparing you to Kylie Minogue at all, but she once said something very, very similar about women and how we should be bigging each other up instead of knocking each other down.
Yeah.
Now, on a serious note, in September 97, you were caught up in the Southall rail disaster. And tragically, you were there at the scene and you reported live at that moment. What was going through your mind at that time?
I should say that lots of people paying attention to this will not know anything about this. And I think it's Britain went through a phase back in the 90s, late 90s and early 21st century of having quite a lot of catastrophic rail accidents. And Southall was one of them. It wasn't the most serious by a long way, but it was an accident, obviously in Southall. The train I'd got on at Cardiff and it was going to Paddington, and it crashed just outside Paddington. 7 people died in the carriage in front of the one that I was in. Devastatingly for me and for the colleagues I was with, all from 5 Live, we shouldn't have been in that carriage. And we were only in that carriage, it was a first class carriage, because I'd asked for us to move because there were no seats left in second class. So in a terrible, I still feel slightly Well, I still think about that a lot. I basically threw a hissy fit because there were no seats in second class, so asked the guard if we could move and sit wrongly in first class because there was loads of space. But unfortunately, the impact of that on the people I was with was that they saw things that day that I wouldn't wish. I mean, obviously, I'm still trying to not to see them myself. So I do think about that. In terms of what I did on the radio that day, this is 1997. I had just been issued my very first BBC mobile phone. They were really quite new, and I'd been given this little thing, which I was very proud of. And of course, it gave me the opportunity to use it for exactly what it was intended for, which was to report live from something going on. What was extraordinary about that day was that when we kind of came to in our carriage, and it had stopped moving by then. I mean, I won't go into exactly what happened. You can probably look it up. I realised I wasn't dead for a start, along with everybody else in the carriage, although there were some very badly injured people very close to us. I reached for the mobile phone and I rang work, because what else could you do? And I said, the train that we're on coming back from Cardiff has crashed. And the guy on the news desk said, well, there's nothing on the Press Association. And I said, no, well, there won't be, because I'm on the train and it's crashed. And he said, oh, well, okay, well, if it has, we'll come back to you. And I just thought, this is, the word surreal is so overused, but trust me, that was the most surreal moment of my life, because I was telling them and something that they hadn't actually heard about yet. So, of course, eventually they did ring me back. And it was actually, and a lot of people can identify with this, when you're up against a time of real crisis in your life, the actual easiest thing to do is to do your job. So I can talk, and that's what I did. What I couldn't do was help anybody. And that is what other people did do that day. And, we talk about the emergency services and what they're able to do at the moment. You just can't praise these people enough. How quickly some people react. And also, I should say, how quickly so-called ordinary members of the public react as well. There were some people in that carriage whose first thought wasn't for themselves or for doing a job like mine, but for helping people. And I was very aware of, in the days and months after that, very aware of what I lacked, if you like, and what other people had, which was an ability to genuinely reach out with practical help to other people. So it's not an experience I'd wish on anybody, but I have to say that a train crash gets a lot of attention, whereas road accidents don't. And because they're much more common, and a lot of people get through those and come out the other side.
And you have worked extensively within news as well. What's been the most memorable breaking news item that you've worked on, obviously, apart from being caught up with that dreadful train disaster?
In terms of the impact on people, Princess Diana dying sounds too trite, actually, but people at university now are too young to remember, obviously, on the whole, or even to have been alive when that happened. My own kids, obviously, they of course know about Princess Diana, because everybody does. In terms of shock value, you'd have to say that was the most. I went to her funeral, and that was, the hysteria and the genuine outpouring of grief. It's hard to imagine it now, but trust me, it was very real, and people were utterly devastated. In a way, the BBC couldn't understand it any more than the BBC's not been able to understand quite a lot recently. I think some people would accuse the BBC of that. There was also, stuff like talking about Drive on 5 Live, which is the show I did with Peter towards the end of my time at 5 Live. Concorde crashed when we were just started quite a work-a-day edition of the programme. And that was the sort of classic breaking news show. And I always say about when I did breaking news, Woman's Hour doesn't really do that at all. They are the easier programs to do in a way, because you've got these amazing BBC resources, and all you have to do as the presenter is just stay calm and ask people what's happened. It's actually not that difficult. obviously 9/11, I was also at 5 Live for that. And of course, that was a remarkable day in my broadcasting life. Just looking outside, actually, it's a lovely day today, and it was actually a lovely day on 9/11 in London, which is where I am now. And I've been to the park in the morning, and then I went into work, and my daughter had been teething in the night, and I hadn't had any sleep. And I remember thinking, God, I really hope you have a quiet day at work today. And of course, it was probably, arguably, the most challenging day of all of our broadcasting lives. But that wasn't, although we did a long program, I think I did 5 or 6 hours that day, and Peter was on holiday, actually. So I was doing it with someone I didn't really normally work with. There was the feeling you didn't have time to process on the day what was happening. And I think it was only a couple of days later that I realized that, in truth, we thought that might be, and this sounds preposterous now, but it might be perhaps the beginning of some sort of global war that we were going to start fighting. I'm not sure that might sound mad now, but at the time it wasn't something you could entirely discount. And I remember afterwards we were all the presenters at 5 Live were given pagers, which is a very old bit of tech. And you were encouraged to go around with it all the time. But mine never went off. I wore it for a year, and it just never once went off. So in the end, I threw it away. I think along with everybody else. It's quite weird. I've forgotten about that.
So obviously you're leaving Woman's Hour at the end of this year.
Yeah.
That was a big decision to make after such a long time presenting the programme. How will you be celebrating?
Well, at the moment, I won't be. I mean, I'd say one thing for Woman's Hour. We used to have brilliant Christmas parties. And so my idea was that I would coincide my leaving the programme with the most epic Woman's Hour Christmas party, which we in the past have had at my house. It's always been a real laugh. But, that's not going to happen. So I'm not sure. It's the worst possible year to make a decision like this. But I think I've done it long enough. And actually, I miss being a radio presenter rather than a Woman's Hour presenter, which carries with it quite a lot of weight. And in the last couple of months, I've been accused of being a man hater, man mad, anti-women. It's just too feminist, not feminist enough. I just like to do something else. I think I've kind of done my time. So I'm quite looking forward, if I'm honest, to not doing that anymore.
And obviously there's been a few names bandied around, obviously, including BBC's Katya Adler. Will you be passing on any advice to whoever steps into your shoes?
Well, Emma Barnett's going to do most of the editions of Woman's Hour, and then the other programmes, they are... So I'm doing programmes up until the end of the year, possibly a bit longer, depending on whatever else is going on at the moment. And then I would... No, I'm not going to give advice to Katya Adler. She certainly doesn't need any from me. I don't think... Well, I have no idea who else is going to be doing the programme. There's a range of really good contenders. I've offered all of them the chance to speak to me if they want to ask any questions about the way the programme works. And quite a few people have already spoken to me. So I'm a big believer in, reaching out to people. I think if you're my generation, we didn't get a lot of help from our seniors, women and men. None of them really, wasn't really much of a history of having mentees or anyone reaching down or across to speak to you. And I think that has changed now. I think we're much more collegiate and much more likely to offer help. And I think you should, by the way. I think I've spoken to a lot of female broadcasters in the BBC in the last couple of years, and I think we all benefit from these conversations, and I wish they happen more often, actually.
I was going to ask you about the different styles of presenting as opposed to your amazing podcast. So fortunately with Fee and Jane, wonderful, listen to it regularly. It's brilliant that Radio 4 are going to be taking that into their schedule, aren't they, from next year?
Yeah.
Which do you prefer, presenting or producing and presenting on your podcast?
Well, I love the podcast because basically the BBC is allowing two middle-aged women to essentially talk to each other. And in the past, there was always this, I think, the idea that freewheeling speech and chat was the kind of thing that men did, and that men were regarded as really funny and witty when they got together with their banter, whereas maybe it would never be as good with women. We've proved that whether we're as funny as men who do it or not, there is an audience that wants to hear two women talking to each other about all kinds of crap and sometimes quite serious stuff. So I'm delighted about that. This week, actually, we've got Bananarama, unfortunately, this week, so that's good. I mean, that is literally, I talked to Fee Glover, who's another Radio 4 presenter and a friend of mine. There's no preparation at all. We never discuss what we're going to discuss. We just do it. And there's obviously no script or anything, no structure, but it's not live. So it doesn't have the adrenaline and the jeopardy of live broadcasting. And even Woman's Hour, which is a very produced and very structured program, is still live, which is why I can still get it wrong. And I do love that. And I do want to do more live radio, so I hope I do get the chance to do it. I don't want to stop doing that because it's a bit like comparing, I don't know, swimming in a chlorinated swimming pool and swimming in the sea. You know, swimming in the sea, if you can do it, is a lot better. There's nothing beats live radio, I don't think.
And in terms of your podcast, obviously it's attracted a wide demographic, actually, hasn't it? Was that ever in the forefront of your minds when you first started doing this, or did you have a set demographic in mind?
I don't think we had any demographic. I didn't even know what a podcast was when I was encouraged to do it. It was the brainchild of a producer who's now left the BBC, who just thought there was a gap and absolutely right, by the way, and it was a man as well. There was a gap in the market for female banter, if you can loosely call it that, and middle-aged female banter, an attempt to recreate the conversations that we all have with our friends, but that you don't hear on radio. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it's been very gratifying that we actually have a surprising number of listeners in their 20s and 30s. And what's really sweet is that we do get a lot of correspondence from students who listen. Well, actually, the most common thing the students say is, we don't really listen, but you remind me a bit of our mums, or my mum talking to her mates. And I was a bit homesick, so I put it on occasionally, and you're just talking shit in the background in my room or whatever it is, and I feel a bit better. So, I mean, that'll do for me. I'm not bothered. If that's why they're listening, that's great. I mean, they all count. We've had, I don't know how many downloads we've got. I mean, it's into the millions, which I think the BBC is slightly embarrassed about, because BBC Sounds is obviously the BBC's attempt to reach out to a younger audience. And I think they're a bit, and we do have younger listeners, but I don't think we were quite what they had in mind when they set up the BBC Sounds podcast.
We've got quite a lot of questions coming in, actually. Obviously, we're live across Facebook and YouTube, so okay. If we could maybe just go to a couple of questions now, that would be great. I'll just see if I can see them here. Okay, so here we've got Rebecca Pawson. What's been your highlight of your career so far?
Highlight. Actually, do you know what? There isn't really one, I'm afraid. Just still being able to do what I do. I would say, and this sounds very twee, but the fact that I wake up and know that I am doing something I like for a living is about as good as it gets. You cannot put a price on that. So my mum and dad, both still alive, I should say, they had jobs and they worked, but I don't think they set off for work with a thinking, oh great, wonder what's going to happen at work today. So even on the worst days, I can honestly say I'd recommend a job in the media. It's it has the potential to be really good fun, and you can't say that for every job.
No, you can't. Liam Hampton asks, hi Jane, do you ever find yourself worrying about being replaced or pushed aside given the media's tendencies to allow men to grow old with grace and cast women aside when they get older?
Well, when I first said I was leaving Woman's Hour, because I'm 56, but Jenny Murray, who did do Woman's Hour for 33 years, retired. Well, she hasn't retired, left the programme at 70. So interestingly, I don't think there was any great pressure on me to leave the programme. They couldn't really have got rid of me if they'd allowed Jenny to carry on till 70. So I was reasonably safe where I was. But it's a really good question. And of course, in the past, the BBC will have to own up to the fact that it did used to tell women, you certainly can't be on telly after you're 50. It's unthinkable. Whereas the likes of John Humphreys was 76 when he stopped doing the Today programme. Andrew Neil, who I do think is great, was on overnight, and I think he's 72 or 3. There are no female equivalents on telly of Andrew Neil, and actually there aren't that many on radio. So it's a perfectly legitimate question. I would hope the tide is changing now, and I do think I will be doing, but I know I'll be doing more radio for Radio 4. I'm just trying to think. The problem hasn't gone away. It really hasn't, and I think we do need to keep challenging it. But as I say, we all have a part to play in this. You've got to big other women up, definitely, and keep on doing it.
Mohsin Ali would like to ask, how important do you think healthy competition between colleagues is in fostering an environment that allows you to deliver the best possible product?
Oh, I think that's a really good question. I think a bit of needle is a good thing. So Peter and I, when we were working together, we never hated each other. But as I said, there were days when we were getting on better than other days. That little bit of tension in the room is always a really good thing if you've got two people doing a programme. But creative tension, not just deep unpleasantness and loathing, which doesn't get you anywhere. There's a fine line. I think everyone does want to be the best and does want to get the biggest audience. And when we were on 5 Live, there were a couple of times when our drive programme got more listeners than the breakfast show at 5 Live, which is a real rarity in radio. I mean, it doesn't happen now, I should say, and it didn't happen all that often then, but it did happen. And Peter and I bloody loved it. We thought it was great. And it pissed off the people doing the breakfast show, obviously. So that was also good. So competition is good, and an eagerness to do well is good. But you don't want it to eat you up, because then you just sound like it becomes negative energy, and there's no point in it then.
And at this point, talking about negative energy, we spoke briefly before about the pay gap, obviously, that just is not going away as an issue between men and women, and it is significantly still higher with men predominantly being paid more than women. What is your future outlook on the landscape of this?
I think, again, this is another issue. I mean, the BBC pay gap is has definitely, the situation's got better. The pay gap is not as big as it was. Also, the pay gap, even before it got better, was considerably better at the BBC than in so many other organisations and private companies in Britain. And it's far, far worse in commercial broadcasting organisations. So credit to the BBC for allowing me to talk about it as I did, and to campaign for a decrease in the pay gap at the BBC, and to allow me to stay at the BBC. So that much, I suppose, we've absolutely got to acknowledge their willingness to allow that situation to continue. However, it is a niggle, more than a niggle, that the situation isn't altogether sorted, not at the BBC and not anywhere else. And I think one of the problems we encountered at the BBC was that a lot of people see us, and I don't blame them, as white, privileged, entitled women. And I would always try to make the point that in many cases that is exactly what we are. But if we're being stuffed in terms of our pay, what do you think is happening to women of colour in any whole variety of different occupations and professions? So I felt that we had a responsibility to acknowledge our privilege and to actually make a noise about what was happening to us. And it is incredible. I mean, I've got the scripts of some of the very earliest editions of Woman's Hour, because Woman's Hour started in 1946. And initially the programme was presented by a man, because the BBC took the view that women wouldn't want to hear a woman on the radio. I mean, that's how far we've travelled in the 74 years of Woman's Hour. So, we now talk quite relatively freely about all kinds of issues on the programme that would be unthinkable back in the 1940s. But Woman's Hour in 1947 did discuss equal pay for the first time. And that is a bit depressing that we're still doing it in 2020. And there are situations, for example, Birmingham City Council got into such terrible trouble with equal pay, with a mass pay claim for equal pay, that it had to sell the NEC. The big supermarkets, Asda, there's the Glasgow City Council. There have been huge campaigns and pay claims put in by women in these organisations and companies, but they didn't attract the attention the BBC was able to get for the issue. So I'm quite proud of what we've done, and I'm also quite proud of the fact that we formed a group of women at the BBC who continue to talk to each other and continue to support each other, because although we knew of each other, in many cases we didn't talk to each other because we were slightly pitted against each other. And that's just, it seems now so negative, and I'm so glad that that situation's improved.
Thank you. Florence Pepper's asking, who has been your most memorable Woman's Hour guest?
In terms of me making a bit of a, so Hillary Clinton, I mean, it's an obvious one in a way, but she was due to come on in 2016 when she was plugging her book. 2017 actually it would have been, won't it? And we had a whole setup that she was going to come on live to Woman's Hour, and the idea was she'd agreed she'd do 20 minutes with us, but I was hoping that because we'd get loads of questions coming in on Twitter and everything else, that I could just keep her there for the whole 45 minutes of the programme, because it's not an hour long, believe it or not. And so I was really excited about this. And we had the Secret Service in first thing in the morning. They were combing the building. There was a guy who said he was going to have to sit with me while I interviewed her, and the BBC was saying, no, it was fine. We never had people with guns in BBC studios. And I was really looking forward to this. And then she fell down the stairs at her hotel and couldn't come. And that meant I had to fill for the whole programme, putting out a load of absolutely diabolical recorded material and bits of rubbish I was just sort of reading off emails and God knows what else. And to get over this humiliating experience, because also my kids had promised to listen. They'd never listened before, and they were listening at their school. And anyway, obviously they turned it off because their mother was just making a prat of herself. And I then went to this thing I'd never been to before and haven't been to since, the Woman of the Year lunch, and which is at some big hotel in London. And I was so, I did drink quite a bit at the lunch because I was pissed off with what had happened. And then I got a phone call when I was having the pudding to say that the Hillary Clinton interview was back on, so could I come back to work? So I ended up having to interview Hillary Clinton in the basement of ITV on the South Bank, having had a bottle of sparkling water and 2 black coffees in a diabolical attempt to and 2 paracetamol to try and sound. It's not my finest hour, I have to say. Not really my fault, but just one of those things. That's the most memorable experience I've had, I would say.
Amazing.
I just about got away with it.
A question from my colleague Darren Harper kind of ties in perhaps with that last question slightly. Who has been the most challenging interviewee that you've had to deal with? I
think there's no. I know I said to you earlier, Lee, that I wouldn't talk about this, but I think it's worth saying that at the moment, issues around the Gender Recognition Act are quite difficult for, I think, all programmes to deal with. I have to say, actually, in Woman's Hour's defence, we're one of the few programmes that does attempt to talk about it, but it is never easy. And I'll be absolutely honest, I don't have a view on this. I'm not just saying I don't. I am genuinely somebody who, if you can be middle of the road on this issue, I'd like to think that's where I am. I have met very powerful speakers and contributors on both sides of that conversation, and I actually enjoy meeting them and I enjoy hearing their views. But I tell you what, if you ever do an interview on Radio 4 about this, you are asking for trouble. And we, the programme, and I, the individual, I get it every time. I have been accused in the last couple of weeks of being anti-women, and I do find that, based on everything that I've done in my career, I do find that, to put it mildly, irritating. So that's not. I think as well there is a misunderstanding sometimes. People think that Woman's Hour can campaign on a subject, and emphatically it can't. Just like the rest of the BBC, we are absolutely honour bound to never take a view on anything, but to try to present various sides of every argument. I mean, of course you don't always get it right, but you've got to be seen to be trying.
And of course, that ties in with the regulation directive that came around, I think it was last week, at the end of last week, wasn't it, about social media and, restricting that as well when it comes to personal opinion. A great question here from Julian Cole. Have you ever been lost for words on air?
Yes. And it was when I was doing an interview. It's an annual event on Woman's Hour. I'm not very good at this item, autumn fashion. And I just couldn't think of anything to ask this contributor, she was absolutely charming. We talked about everything I could think of on the subject of what this autumn's key jacket was going to be. And in the end, I actually think I said to her, "I'm really sorry, I can't think of anything else to ask you." It's just, I owned it at least. And she was very, very sweet about it, actually. I think it might have been the first time she'd ever been on radio. And I think beforehand I'd been really patronising to her. And I'd said things like, "Don't worry, it's up to me. I'll keep you talking." I just had a total brain freeze. Awful. But anyway, there you go. That's
okay. So moving on from that, I'm just very, very aware of time. So I just want to ask one more question about Woman's Hour before moving forwards to look at your future. So last question. What is the one thing that you will miss the most about doing Woman's Hour? And that's from Demaya Williams.
Well, that's a really good question, Demaya. Thank you. It's the connection between the programme and the audience, I think. I think it's genuinely unbeatable. When the programme's at its best, and we did a programme a couple of Fridays ago on the impact of long COVID on women. It seems that more women than men are getting it. We don't know that. I've got to be very careful. But I think a lot of women in their 50s and older are really struggling with the effects of COVID over a longer period of time. And we had some amazing contributors, and then we got an incredible reaction from the audience afterwards. It's that connection that the programme has, the trust between the listeners. There are some carpers every day, and we always get terrible crap on the Twitter as well. But the real audience really appreciate what they hear on a good day, and I will really miss that.
Your next programme on Radio 4 is set to be based around high-profile interviews. And I think it's due to start in April, if that's right. What are you most looking forward to about this programme?
Well, you know what I'm looking forward to is finding out more about it.
Okay.
I've got to be totally honest. I think I don't think Radio 4, they didn't think I wanted to stop. So they didn't think I wanted to stop Woman's Hour, because I think they may have thought that with Jenny deciding to leave, that I would, fling myself headlong at it. But I just feel like a change. And I think if the last year has taught us anything, it's that you genuinely don't know what you're going to be hit with. And change is never easy. For me, it's really difficult, actually. But I just thought, if I don't leave now, one day I am going to wake up and I'm going to be 65 and I'll still be there, and that won't be right. The programme needs fresh voices to get a new generation up and listening. So I think one of the best things you can do is to admit when you feel like your time is up in a particular role. And if people like me don't move on, then no one else can move up. It's as simple as that.
So in terms of moving on, could we expect to see you on a series of Strictly Come Dancing at any time in the near future?
All I'll say about that, I actually know Jackie Smith, who is I work with her in a sort of different capacity, doing something outside broadcasting. And Jackie, I thought she was very brave to do it. And I thought she was really courageous, but bloody hell, I would not go near that with a barge pole. I wouldn't. It's too frightening. And also, I don't know my left from my right, genuinely. So I would really struggle.
I know that I heard you talking on your podcast last week about binge watching Grey's Anatomy. Obviously, we are hours away, allegedly, apparently, from this national lockdown, the second national lockdown. What are your TV tidbits? Have you got any nuggets that we could be watching in the next lockdown? What will you be doing apart from obviously working?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I am watching the Hugh Grant and Nicole Kidman, The Undoing, which I've only seen the first episode. I suppose I'll watch The Crown. I don't sound very enthusiastic, do I? I'm meant to be interviewing Gillian Anderson, who's playing Margaret Thatcher. I think that's coming up the week after next. I'm quite looking forward to that. I should actually say that Woman's Hour has kept going. It's not every programme on Radio 4 has been able to keep going. So we are still doing the programme, but under very difficult circumstances. We're still going into Broadcasting House. And I just think it's worth saying that I'm really grateful to my colleagues who are making that possible. There's only 3 of us allowed in every day. And we're going in on public transport. I don't have that far to travel, but some of my colleagues are a long time on public transport every morning, have been since March. And, this is difficult and sometimes deeply depressing. And Broadcasting House is still, I think it's about 90% empty. So I know everyone's up against it at the moment, and I feel for students. My daughter's at university, and I think there's a part of her that would quite like to come home, but she can't for a while, and I understand why not. But this is a really hard time for everyone, and I think radio actually has played quite a significant part in just keeping people going. And I'm really hopeful that the usual recorded programmes that go out on BBC Radio on Christmas Day will be dumped this year in favour of live stuff, because I don't really think that we won't be out of the woods by Christmas at this rate, I don't think.
But I have heard that you're going to be on Pointless. Is that true? You and Fee?
Well, I'm not sure that's enough to as an antidote to the coronavirus, but yes, we are going on Pointless. Yes.
Hurrah! I think that'll be amazing.
Yeah, I mean, who cares about corona? We're going on Pointless. Yeah, you're right. But actually, I'm worried I won't be able to get my hair cut before then, so that I might have to call that off.
Oh, we'd love to see you on Pointless. Final question before we go. Amelia Riley asks, what do you think the key is to success?
Just, enjoy and trying to enjoy it. Never take yourself too seriously, but actually, important bit of advice, particularly for women, take yourself a bit seriously, because you'd be amazed how seriously other people take you if you do take yourself seriously. So I've just contradicted myself there, but I think a certain amount of inner steel and a bit of confidence is never a bad thing. And you can go home and not take yourself seriously. If you've got a family, you can guarantee they won't take you seriously. But just have a bit of inner belief and a desire to do it. And also a recognition that you will never get it right. You will never please everybody all the time. But you know what? It's better than being bored at work. And how great is it to wake up in the morning and just want to go to work?
Jane Garvey, that was absolutely phenomenal. Thank you so much for being here with us and all your golden nuggets of advice. I could talk to you for hours, and I'm sure I'll catch up with you again very soon. Thank you so much from all of us here at Leeds Trinity University and all the students in Journalism and Media Week. Don't forget, our next guest, of course, is the Yorkshire Post sports editor, Nick Westby, who is up at 1 o'clock. Please keep your comments and questions coming in. Thanks so much again, Jane.
Thank you, Lee. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.